Hawa. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for taking the time to tune in. Appreciate you guys being here. We're going to get into this book today. Just wanted to go ahead and go over, a lot of tribal names and clans and subdivisions of bigger tribes that people have never heard of. All right. And so that's what we're going to start doing. This book is going to help us learn a lot of new tribes or names that you never heard of. There's other books we're going to get into as well. But this one specifically is called The Indians of the Southeastern United States by John R. Swanton. Okay. Classic of Smithsonian anthropology. All right. So again, a lot of people just know about the 5 civilized tribes. And so let's get specific. Let's get more detailed. And let's learn about the specific sub-clans or sub-tribes of the Southeastern United States. So this book was originally printed or published in 1946. So this is when he's saying in my time, you can reference he's talking about the 1940s. All right. I just want to say this is for fair use that we're doing this, for education, for discussion, for critique, for reviewing. If you like the book, make sure to get it. I recommend having a physical copy, of the book. It's good to have as reference, and it's in alphabetical order so you can easily find a tribe that you might be looking for. And it might be listed here, okay? I also have this available for my Patreons on my Patreon page, PDF version, all right? So we're going to belly flop to all the way to page 81. He goes over a lot of things, before this, talking about the regions and other different things like that, the weather, how the land is, the geography, where these tribes are. So we skipped kind of all that. We're going right into the different clans and tribes, and it's in alphabetical order. So it says here sketches of the Southeastern tribes and their population. And it says here the Abika or Abika. And who are they? This was one of the principal divisions of the Upper Creeks and occupied what is now Talladega County, Alabama, or Talladega County, Alabama. All right, so these are a so-called Creek group or tribe. Creeks is a made-up word, guys. That's not what they call themselves. So this is a great example already. The name is one of those which appear in the Creek migration legends, and it is sometimes extended to cover all the creeks, or at least all the upper creeks. All right, you see that? So that might be a more accurate name. The importance of Abika is indicated by the fact that it formed one of the 4 towns, sometimes called the 4 foundation towns of the Confederation. Hawkins was told that this tribe was one of the oldest, and he attributed to them the introduction of some of the most ancient customs, including punishment for adultery and the regulation of marriage, Punishment for adultery, Just like so-called Hebrews or Israelites. The first historical appearance of the name is in the Luna narratives of 1560 in the form of Abika. Stiggins says that they were possessed of a brass drum obtained, according to tradition, from a foreign people whom he identifies with the followers of De Soto. But it may well have come from the followers of Luna, or more likely, from the British. The name of the principal Abika town usually appears in the form of Abitutsi, Little Abika, and there was another of the same name occupied by Okfuski Indians. 2 other towns of this tribe were known respectively as Talladega, End Town, and Hantati, Red Earth. This tribe welcomed part of the fugitive Natchez when they were obliged to quit the Chickasaw country and intermarried with them extensively, They took no part in the Creek War of 1813, 1814. After the removal, they established a square ground a few miles northwest of the present Eufaula, Oklahoma, and another farther west known as Abika in the west. The Kati, didn't we just read about the Kati recently? And Aladiga, square grounds, were re-established, but the former was soon given up. The latter is still in existence near Henrietta. Gashet enumerates two branch towns called Takaki, Tlaco, or Big Shoal, and Kayomalgi, which probably signifies Mulberry Place. The second may have been occupied, in part at least, by Shawnee, and there was also a Chickasaw village on the creek which bore this name. Tobias Fish speaks of the Lunhamga Ham town in the Abecas, which may have been still another out settlement. Abika population, only one town, Abikutsi, is given in the census list prior to 1832. And for these, only the gunmen, warriors, or hunters are returned as follows. So these are some of the population numbers. Again, we got to dodge the hijack. We're talking about 1800s. A lot of people were already reclassified, enslaved, by this time. So, the numbers aren't always going to be exact. We got to, always dodge the hijacks and pull out the babies. All right. Just wanted to say that. So it says that in 1738, there were 30, 1750s, plus 60, and so on and so on. You guys see the numbers. Okay. The United States Census taken in 1832 to 1833 returned 378 Indians in Abikutsi, 191 in Kankati, 334 in Aladiga, and 175 in Kiamu Mulga town. All right. So that was a little bit about the Abika. All right. Now you know about them if you never heard of them. We continue with the list. It says here the Acolapissa. In 1699, this tribe was living on Pearl River, about 4 leagues, 11 miles from its mouth. It was said to occupy 6 villages, and the statement is added that the Hangi Pahoa had formerly constituted a 7th. When these people were visited by Bienville in the winter of 1699 and 1700, he learned that they had been attacked 2 days before by some English slave hunters at the head of 200 Chickasaw. All right, so-called English. Don't picture so-called white folks. Remember, a lot of these English were Sephardic Jews, Moors. They're being called English because they came in from England. Their families had lived in England for a couple generations. A lot of them had a different ethnicity, though. And look what else. They came with 200 Chickasaws that were helping them enslave other Indians, guys. This is the history a lot of people don't like me mentioning. Everybody just wants to be the good guys. Oh, we were angels. My people never did that. They never enslaved others. That's not true. This is real history here. There was tribal beef. In 1702 or 1705, they moved to Bayou Castine on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain. And 6 months later, the Natchitoches, whose crops had been ruined, came to St. Denis, then in command of the Mississippi Ford, and were settled by him beside the Acolapissa. In 1714, however, when he attempted to take them back to their own country, the Acolapissa attacked them and killed 17, besides capturing 50 women and girls, most of whom were restored later. In 1718, or at least before 1722, the Acolapissa removed to the Mississippi River to be near New Orleans and settled on the east side 13 leagues, about 35 miles above it. In the year last mentioned, they were visited by Father Charlevoix, who gives a considerable description of them and says that the house of their chief was 36 feet in diameter, 6 feet more than that of the Natchez great son. A little higher up the river, they had a small village, then abandoned. In their old town was a temple, and this was rebuilt after they moved to the Mississippi, as we know from the sketch of it made by A. de Batz in 1732, and most fortunately recovered by the late D. I. Bushnell Jr. From what an officer with M.D. Noel, tells us 7 years later, it is evident that this tribe and the Bayogula, all right, Gula, right, this is a Siouan tribe, and Huma, who had settled nearby, were gradually becoming amalgamated, all right, with our Eastern Siouan people amalgamated, right? So you forget about all these people, right? He prefers to call them all Acolapissa or Colapissas. But the name of the Huma had the greater survival value, and the consolidated tribes appear at about this point under the name for a considerable period. The Acolapissa and Bayogula seem to have combined first and later to have united with the Huma. Acolapissa population, it says in 1699, Bienville gave the number of Acolapissa warriors as about 150, but Lahar places it at 300. All right, that's a big difference. You see what I'm saying? They don't really know. We got to just, dodge the hijack with these numbers a little bit. Again, people are being reclassified and enslaved and being called and turned into colored folks, so-called black, so-called Negroes, right? So-called white. Iberville's census of families made in 1702 assigns 250 to this tribe. And Charleville in 1722 says there were 200 warriors. In 1739, the Acolapissa, Bayogula, and Huma together were reported to have 90 to 100 warriors and a total population of 270 to 300. After that, all are called Huma. Mooney's estimate of this tribe as of the year 1650 is 1,500, including the Tangi Hahoa, and is, if anything, somewhat too high. The mixed blood group, still bearing the Huma name, locally evidently formed the bulk of the 1,089 Indian population of Louisiana, according to the census of 1930, whose tribal affiliations were not reported, since 899 of them were in Terrebonne Parish. Look at that. So there's a great example. You see there, these numbers, right? So by 1930, come on now, we already know by 1930 what's going on, right? A lot of these Indians have been reclassified, paper genocide. Okay, so that was two tribes we went over already, right? Be honest, have you guys ever heard of these two tribes? And a lot of these tribes are the people being classified under 5 civilized tribes, Cherokee possibly being called Cherokee. And this is what I'd be saying a lot of the times. If you're Cherokee, you actually might be something else. Cherokee became a blanket term a lot of the time for Indian. All right. And they got absorbed or amalgamated into the so-called Cherokee, which is really a confederation of different peoples, not just a specific tribe, right? Acuera, all right, this is the third tribe we're going to be talking about, the Acuera. Says here, a Timucua tribe, right? Remember the Timucua from Florida? The Timucua tribe probably located along the upper course of Ocklawaha River, Florida. It appears first in the De Soto narratives, and Garcilaso de la Vega identifies it with the province of Ocali, where the Spaniards sojourned for a month in the summer of 1539. But Rangel, who may usually be relied upon, speaks of it as a province to which they sent for corn while they were staying at Ocali. And Gallegos reported to De Soto that Acuera and Ocali were 2 days' journey apart. After the Spaniards settled in Florida permanently, we hear of an encounter between Acuera Indians and members of an expedition sent from Havana in 1604. And I got a video on these, right? This expedition from Havana so-called Spanish, right? A lot of these, again, Sephardic Jews, Moors, Muslim Moors from Spain and Portugal, so-called English, so-called all this other stuff. And these are black folks, guys, right? We're not talking about, oh no, it's not the same, Kurimeo. You're talking about a lighter complexion people. They're not really Negroes. No, you guys don't know real history. You're being biased. I'm telling you, these are straight black folks that came, these colonists, especially Sephardic Jews, these Moors, all these people. All right. The governor of Florida had some difficulty in overcoming the effects of this. But by 1655, two missions, San Luis and Santa Lucia, had been established in the Acuera country. As we do not hear of these again, it may be assumed that they were given up in consequence of the Timucua rebellion in 1656. Acuera population, no figures seem to have come down to us. You see that? That's why I'm trying to tell you. How could they have no figures, no numbers? What happened to all these Acuera people? What happened to them? Why don't they have figures? All right. Yeah, you still here, guys. You still here. So now we continue with another tribe, the Adai. Now, guys, all right. I'm not saying these are what I'm about to say, like exactly. I'm just pointing out something. Add an M to this. Add an M to the beginning of this word. You got Madai, right? Madai, wasn't that a son of Japhet? Are they related? I'm not saying they are. I'm just pointing that out. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, let's go. A Kadu tribe, living when first discovered by Europeans near the present site of Robelin, Louisiana. The Kadu tribe. Okay, there were Adai Indians at the Franciscan mission of San Francisco de los Tejas, the first in eastern Texas, founded by Captain Alonso de Leon and Father Damien Massanet in June 1690. In 1699, Iberville seems to have been given the name of this tribe under the form Natao. In 1717, the mission of San Miguel de Linares was established among them. 2 years later, it was destroyed by the French with Nachitoches and Kadu allies, but rebuilt in 1721, and near it was located the Presidio of Nuestra Señora del Pilar de los Adais. All right, Adai. For 50 years, this was the capital of Texas. All right, you guys hear that? This was the original capital of Texas. Or not the original, but one of the capitals, right? But Presidio and Mission were both abandoned in 1773. In 1778, Mezières states that the tribe was almost extinct, huh? Almost extinct, huh? What happened? How can you just become extinct, huh? Oh, you mean enslaved? Oh, you mean reclassified? Or you mean maybe possibly sent to the Caribbean or other plantations? Is that what you mean by extinct? Huh. But Sibley reported in 1805 that there was a small settlement on Lake Macdon near an affluent of Red River. The remnant probably combined with the other Kadu and followed their fortunes. The vocabulary of their language, fortunately preserved by Sibley, shows that it differed widely from the rest of the Kadu dialects, all right? They're not really speaking the same as the Kadu, even though they might be related. Maybe they started mixing. They might be a separate people of the Kadu, but eventually it seems that they got absorbed into the Kadu and listed under the Kadu. But why would they have a different dialect or different language, right? It says Adai population. Bienville reported 50 warriors in 1700, but twice as many in 1718. In 1721, the re-established mission was said to serve 400 Indians. Sibley reported 20 men in 1805, but the proportion of women was much greater. In 1825, there were said to be 27. I estimated maximum population of about 400. And again, we take these numbers with a grain of salt. Like we know what happened in history, right? Okay. Aguacaleyquen, it says. See Utena, page 201. So we continue, right? We go to the next tribe. It says here the Ais. the Ais, and we have read about them in a video. Again, I have a great video on the Ais and Pedro Menendez and the Huguenots and Chief Saturania, right, of the Tamiqua. I have a whole video on this. Make sure to check it out. Pretty good info on what happened in the wars and who was allies with who and all that. So Pedro Menendez visited them in 1565. Before departing, established 200 of his men on the lagoon, 3 leagues from the Ais town. All right. So remember, these are a lot of these, most of these are melanated Europeans that he's what established 200 of them, right? And very close to the Ais town. During the winter, they got into difficulties with the Indians and moved south to the neighborhood of St. Lucie River, where lived the Wakata, who were more friendly to them and acquired at this time the name of the mission Santa Lucia. Fontanera mentions the tribe in his memoir. In 1570, or shortly before, there was war between the Spaniards and the Ais, since we learn of peace being concluded that year. In 1597, Governor Mendez de Canso, or Canco, but it's Canso in French, right? On his way from the head of the Florida Keys to St. Augustine, met the Ais chief, who had with him 15 canoes and more than 80 followers. Wow. At the chief's request, the governor afterwards sent an interpreter and 2 Indians to explain his wishes to the Ais Indians. When these emissaries were killed by the latter, Consul exacted a summary revenge which had an immediate quieting effect upon them. Later, trouble arose in consequence of the escape of 2 Negro slaves and their marriage with Ais women. All right, there you go. Look at that. What Negro slaves? So-called Negro. Show me these people who they really were, right? No specifics, just calling 2 people Negro, saying they mixed with the Ais women. Huh. So who were these so-called Negroes? Are we talking about other Indians from other parts of America that were enslaved, or are we talking about Europeans, black European slaves that married Ais women? We're not getting specifics, so anything's up for grab, guys. Let's not be biased. Keep an open mind. But they're letting you know either way, what would that cause, right? What does that mean that there was so-called Negro blood in Ais, right? Tribes, at least in this marriage, right? But we already know the Ais were melanated as well. So-called Negro. They were finally recovered, however, and the Ais chief came to St. Augustine the same year with 24 warriors to offer his services against the French and English. Promise was extended that a young Spaniard would be sent to learn the Ais language, but it is doubtful if this was ever done. In 1609, the principal chief of the Ais visited St. Augustine, and several minor chiefs of the southeast coast were baptized. All right, baptized, huh? In 1703, an attempt was made to reduce, in parentheses, these Indians to the Roman Catholic faith, though there is no evidence that it was carried through. Oh, no evidence. Oh, it most likely did happen. In 1699, the Quaker Dickinson, don't assume so-called white when we see the word Quaker. We have proven there was many so-called black Quakers coming in from Europe, who I believe, and this is my opinion, this is just from the research I've been doing all these years, I believe these so-called black Quakers are the very early Mormons that eventually ended up, and yeah, we're talking about so-called black people, right? Mormons, black Quakers, who had been shipwrecked near Jupiter Inlet, passed through the Ais territory, and he gives a very good account of its inhabitants. Roman states that the last of the Calusa Indians, consisting of 80 families, crossed to Havana after the cession of Florida to Great Britain in 1763. But it is probable that these consisted largely, if not entirely, of the Indians who had lived on the East Coast and among them the Ais. Adair says that the fugitives included 30 men. Continues says the Ais population. No figures of any kind exist other than mention of the fact above noted. Wow. They don't want you to know, guys. You're still here. They don't want you to know how many of you were really. There's a lot. How could it not exist, right? That in 1597, the chief of the Ais came out to meet Governor Mendez, the consul, with 15 canoes and 80 Indians, in the general statement that it was the most populous tribe on the southeast coast. All right, the most populous tribe, but they don't have no figures. Does that make sense? They're hiding it. They don't want you to know how deep you were. For this tribe, the Tequesta, and the other small tribes of that section, Mooney made an estimate of 1,000 as of 1650. It is probable that the Costa Indians, not the Cusa, Costa or Coast Indians, in the missions about St. Augustine in the first half of the 18th century were drawn from this and the other tribes formerly living near them. All right? They were where? In the missions already, right? You've been reclassified. And they're trying to take the Indian out of you and Christianize you. And they were successful. Yep. Got all Christianity, where all these Anabaptists and all these religious Christianity sects that are around today is what I'm talking about. In 1726, 88 of these were recorded. In 1728, 52. Okay? And that's the numbers right here for other people. And then we continue. All right? Hope you guys enjoying, learning about these specific tribes and their names, their specific clans, where they, who are they related to, other bigger tribes that you might know, so you guys can understand. We continue with the Akokisa. This name was given by the Spaniards to the Atakapa Indians in Texas. Okay, the Akokisa. So it's just another name for the Atakapa. In particular to those about Galveston and Trinity Bays and on Trinity River. Okay, so this reminds me of my Juneteenth video, and we did mention the Akokisa and the Karakangwa. I forget the name, the Karakangwa and the Akokisa. Most likely are the ones they went to free, that were still slaves in missions when they're talking about that June 19th thing, and I've proven it. Go check out my Juneteenth video, all right? So the Akokisa, they were in that area of Galveston, as you guys can see, and Trinity Bays on the Trinity River. The Han, look at that. The Han, look at this, guys. Wow, the Han, huh? The Han, I thought that was a Chinese dynasty. The Han, huh? There was a tribe here called the Han. You guys see that? Whom Cabez de Vaca placed in 1528 on the eastern end of an island believed to be Galveston Island, huh? The Han, huh? The Han were probably a part of these people. The name given being perhaps a synonym of Añ or Aña, with that N with the line that's in Spanish like Eñe, Aña, the Atakapa, and Akokisa word for house. In 1703, according to the French traveler Pennicott, whose dates, however, are always open to suspicion, 2 Frenchmen sent on an exploring expedition by Bienville returned and reported that they had reached a tribe of cannibals. Gosh, the hijack. Remember, they were trying to make these people into cannibals. We got that in my Juneteenth video. They made it all up so they can enslave them, And these may have been the Akokisa. Though on the other hand, they may not have gotten beyond the Atakapa proper. In 1719, a French vessel named Maréchal de Estes touched on this coast and landed 5 officers who had volunteered to refill the water cask. They encountered Indians, however, and only one of them, an ensign named Simard de Belaisle, escaped with his life. This man lived among the Akokisa for more than a year as a captive and was reduced to the last stage of want and misery when a letter he had written fell into the hands of Saint Denis, commandant of Natchitoches, who sent some Natchitoches Indians to rescue him and bring him to that post. All right, again, allying with different Indians, right? These Indian tribes aligning themselves with Europeans. All right, Bel Iso called the Akokisa Cox, probably from Atakapa Hoi, speech or language. He reached Nachitoches in February 1721 and passed from there to Biloxi, where Vainville listed him as an interpreter under subtile, and which Bernard de la Harpe was about to set out for the Texas coast, the captain being Jean Barringer. They sailed August 17th and reached Galveston Bay 10 days later, where they opened communication with the Indians and on their return carried away 9 of them. From these Indians, Barringer took down the only vocabulary of Akokisa, words now in existence. They subsequently escaped and tried to return to their homes by land. A part probably succeeded because the French learned from other Indians to the westward of New Orleans that such a body of Indians had passed through their territories. As early as 1747, the establishment of a mission among the Akokisa was suggested by a Spanish officer, and in 1748-49, the mission of San Ildefonso was founded 9 miles northwest of the present Rockdale, Milam County, Texas, on the San Gabriel River, to include this tribe, the Bidai, right? That's a tribe, the Bidai, the Deadus, and the Patidi. Look at all these tribes, guys, that you've probably never heard of. And be honest, have you heard of these tribes? Well, now you have, okay? These are everybody just knows about the 5 civilized tribes, and that's it, and Algonquins and Iroquois and things like that, so-called Sioux and all this other stuff. But they don't know about these tribes, these people, and their real names. In 1751, after an epidemic, the Indians deserted to join the Nabedachi in an expedition against the Apache. Right? Who are they fighting? Other Indians. On their return, 16 families encamped near San Javier Mission, or Xavier, from which they were served for some time. Now, remember, when it comes to the Apache, they were like heavily enslaved. Remember, a lot of them were sent to Cuba, the Caribbean, and Mexico, and things like that, the Yucatan. Yeah, remember, we read this. So possibly these Indians helped enslave these people, this other tribe. In 1756, in consequence of the arrest of a French trader among the Akokisa 2 years before, a presidio was established 2 leagues from the mouth of the Trinity. 50 Tlaxcaltec families, listen to this, Tlaxcaltec families being settled about it, and it was named San Agustin de Ahumada. About the same time, the mission of Nuestra Senora de la Luz was begun some distance south of the present Liberty. In 1764, the presidio burned down and was abandoned, and the mission with it. Why was it burned down? You mean the Indians burned it down and escaped? Okay. In 1805, Sibley reported that the chief town of the Akokisa was on the west side of the Colorado River, which means that a removal had taken place. It is not known whether these people finally joined their relatives in Louisiana or united with the Bidai or Arankawa. All right, this is what I was saying about my Juneteenth video. These are the people really being freed June 19th, guys, not African slaves. If you're having a hard time accepting that, go watch my Juneteenth video for all the proof, all the primary sources. Or whether they died out in their old country, but they now disappear from the records. Uh-oh, they disappeared, huh? The Akokisa disappeared, huh? The Atakapa. No, you didn't disappear. You're still here. And you guys know who you are. I got a lot of Akokisa or Atakapa followers of my channel. They know who they are. They didn't disappear. Dodge the hijack. This is what I mean. From the records, huh? Disappeared only from the records. Paper genocide. So it says Akokisa population. In 1719, 21, Bel Isle estimated total population of 250 and La Harpe 200. Figures which seem small for a people spread over so much territory. You see what I'm saying, guys? Like these numbers are not accurate. They're trying to downplay how many Indians they really enslaved and murdered in history. And this is why they downplay these numbers and try to say, oh, they went extinct, oh, they disappeared. Yeah, right. You know what you did. The Spanish officer Captain Orobio y Basterra in 1747 reported that they lived in 5 villages, and he estimated that there were 300 families. But Sibley claimed that about 1760 to 70, they had in the neighborhood of 80 men, a rather close agreement with the figure given by Bel Azo. All right, and that is a little info on the Akokisa or Atakapa people, right? We move on to another tribe here, and as you guys can see, they were called the Alabama, right? That's where you get the state Alabama. It's named after an Indian tribe, in case you didn't know that. I know a lot of you already know this, but maybe there's a lot of people that don't, guys, believe it or not. So, the first encounter between the Indians and the whites, so called whites, black Europeans, Europeans of many shades, was at some point in the northern part of what is now Mississippi, west or northwest of the Chickasaw. But the references are a little confusing, since Birma and Garcilaso give the name to a province, right, in parentheses, example, a tribe, including the occupants of a barricade thrown across the Spaniards' way, according to Birma, simply to try their strength. Wow. While Rangel and Elvas bestowed upon a small village where they passed the first night after leaving the Chickasaw, they do not so designate the barricade which both nonetheless mention. At any rate, there can be no little doubt that at least part of the Alabama tribe were in the region in question, and what some of them were concerned in the defense of the stockade. When the next we hear of them at the end of the 17th century, they were living on Alabama River, just below the junction of the Coosa and Tallapoosa. Okay, those are the neighboring tribes. In 1702, when the French established themselves at Fort Lewis in Mobile Bay, they found the Mobile and Tohomi tribes at war with the Alabama. Okay, the Mobile tribe, huh? Another name, right? Another name that they grabbed from Indians, right? Now it's a town or a county today, Mobile, Alabama, right? So they were at war with these other tribes, and they themselves became involved in the hostilities, the Alabama being abetted and sometimes like actively aided by the English. This war lasted from 1703 to 1712. That's a lot of years. You're right? That's literally 9 years. Imagine being in the war for 9 years. I know to us, we read this, oh, like that's a few, but just try to have reference, like 9 years is a long time. In 1750, an English influence was shaken by the great Yamasee uprising, so called English, the Yamasee uprising, and in 1717, Bienville established a post at the junction of the Coosa and Tallapoosa, which was named Fort Toulouse. It secured the tribe to the French interest until the entire territory was surrendered to England in 1763. About the time of its erection, the Tawasa, Tawasa, who had taken refuge near Mobile after attacks by the English and Creeks, joined the Alabama and established themselves in the towns of Tawasa and Autaga or Autauga. The Awokti seem to have accompanied them, right? There's a whole other tribe right there. Hawkins describes all of these towns as they existed in 1799, when the Alabama proper seemed to have been confined to red ground or Kantati, although we know that Alabama also occupied Okchaiutsi and probably Muklasa. and part of white ground, or Kankatki. Before the above movement took place, the Alabama had a town called Bear Fort, given on the maps as Nita Hauritz for Nita Holita, farther down the river. After the peace concluded between England and France in 1763, the tribe began to break up. As early as 1778, some Kankati and Tawasa moved to Florida to swell the numbers of the Seminole. All right, you hear that? So a lot of these Seminoles that I've been trying to tell you, Seminoles like a confederation too, guys. It's like a group of different Indians and Black Europeans too, guys. Like I know a lot of you just want them to be Indians, but you see, you might not even know if you're Seminole that you might be actually Kankati or Tawasa Indians. Some Alabama of the town of Okchaiutsi accompanied those Huasati, who effected a temporary settlement on Tombigbee River at about this period. A considerable body went as far as the Mississippi, where they were found in August 1777 by William Bartram, 2 miles above the Manchac. This band remained here until after 1784. In the meantime, other bodies of Alabama seem to have moved to Red River, and by the time Sibley made his report in 1806, there was one band containing about 30 men living near the Cadu, the greater part of a settlement that had been made 60 miles above Bayou Rapids, and another party about 30 miles northwest of Opelousas. Later, some Alabama moved to the Sabine River, and the greater part of them finally drifted into Texas, where they are settled in what is now Polk County, between Livingston and Woodville, though a few families remained in Louisiana. That portion which stayed in the Creek Nation took a very active part in the Creek War of 1813 to 14, and after its conclusion, their old territory having been ceded to the so-called whites, they were compelled to move north of the confluence of the Coosa and Tallapoosa. Most of them settled in a town which took the name of the Tawasa, and this may mean that the Alabama who remained in the nation were mainly of that formerly distinct tribe. Okay? The rest are said to have gone to live on Coosa River above Wetumpka and may perhaps have constituted the settlement which appears in the census of 1932 to 1933 as Autauga, or the one occupied by the Okchaiutsi Indians. All right, so again, by this time, guys, a lot of Indians have been reclassified, paper genocide. Just keep that in mind. As noted above, Okchaiutsi, or Little Okchai, was an Alabama offshoot, which seems to have owed its name to the fact that the Alabama had at one time formed one town with the Okchai Indians, or at least lived in close conjunction with them. All right, you see that? Different tribes mixing together, creating like divisions, sub-tribes. All right? This name appears first in 1750, and the town is said to have maintained a separate existence even after the removal to Oklahoma. But it now survives only as a ceremonial name. The Alabama Indians in Oklahoma still, 1928, maintain a square ground in the neighborhood of Welitka. In 1761, we hear of a branch village called Wetumpka. The Muklasa Indians, Muklasa, were probably a branch of the Alabama, but they have been treated separately. Alabama population. All right, again, we ready to dodge the hijack with the numbers, but let's see what it's saying. It says 1702, Iberville estimated 400 families of Alabama in 2 villages. That's a lot of people. 400 families, consistent of how many people per family, huh? Yeah. So 2 villages, these 400 families of Alabama, and a census taken by the English in 1715 gives 4 villages with a total population of 770, including 214 men. Both of these are exclusive of the Tawasa and Hawati. A French document of the third decade of the same century gives 6 towns and 400 men, probably including the Tawasa and Hawati. The following figures for the warriors or hunters are given for the Alabama alone, not including the Tawasa or Okchaiutsi. 15 in 1750, 150 in 1760, 70 in 1761, 60 in 1792, 80 in 1799. For Okchaiutsi, we have 40 in 1750, 100 in 1760, 20 in 1761, 40 in 1792. Again, you know, starts to hijack with the numbers. Writing in 1814, Stiggins ventures an estimate of 2,000 as the total Alabama population, but this is too high. Why is that too high? In the census of 1832 to 33, they are represented only by the towns of Tawasa and Autauga, with 321 Indians and 21 Negro slaves. All right, that's the hijack, how they be separating people. What is a Negro? That's not a nation or tribe. That's not a nation or tribe. So who are you talking about? And we know the whole false history of African slaves being brought here. So you can't say, oh, Kurimeo, they mean the African slaves. No, you're wrong. You're obviously missing a lot of context and haven't been here in the last 8 years, and with all the research we've done, proven that Indians were so-called Negroes. So what do you mean, Negro slaves? That could be, Indians from other parts of Americas again, but that could also mean Black European slaves too. Let's not be biased. All right. Sibley, writing in 1805, estimates 30 to 40 men respectively for the two towns of Louisiana. In 1817, Moore says there were 160 Alabama Indians in Texas. In 1882, the United States Indian Office estimated 290 Alabama, Coasati, and Muskogee in Texas, and it repeats these figures till 1901, when 470 are given on the authority of the census of 1900. This, in turn, was repeated until 1911, but in 1910, a special agent was sent to the tribe, and he reported 192, a figure which was, again, copied in several subsequent reports. All right, so especially by the 1900s, guys, a lot of paper genocide has already happened. The United States Census of 1910 returned 187 Alabama and Texas and 111 in Louisiana, a total of 298. No separate enumeration of the Alabama and Oklahoma has been made so far as I am aware. Okay, that's what he's saying. Now, we're going to continue. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading, getting to know these tribes and these names that you never heard of these tribes in more detail, right? We continue with the Amacano. Let's see what it says. It says, a tribe associated with the Caparas and Chine tribes. Huh? The Caparas and what? Chine or Chine? Chine? Chino? Chinese? We're not talking about Chinese people in Asia, guys. We're talking about a tribe called Chinese or Chine, right? In the Southeast. You ever heard of these? So this is what I'm saying. What came first? The Chinese on the other side, or these Chinese and the Americans in the true old world? It's things we're going to find out in the future, right? I've never heard of these tribes personally, guys. I'm learning as I'm reading and recording this with you guys. Like I'm learning too. And this is why I kind of wanted you guys to hear it as I'm learning too. We all learn together. These tribes have been forgotten and then grouped into other tribes in history. So now we're getting the details. So the Amacano are a tribe associated with the Caparas and Chine tribes in the Doctrina of San Luis on the seacoast of the Apalachee country. Apalachee, huh? Chinese tribe, a tribe called Chine, in the Apalachee country, right? We're not talking about Asia. It was established in 1674. They might have been part of the Yamasee. The three towns in which these tribes lived contained 300 persons. All right. So that's it. That's all we got on the Amacano, right? I just wanted you to see. Continue says the Anadarko, or more correctly, Nadako. Nadako. Who are the Anadarko or Nadako? It says a tribe of the Hasinai Confederacy of the Kadu. That's who they are. In 1542, the Spaniards under Moscoso met them in northwestern Louisiana or northeastern Texas, probably near the site of Logansport, Louisiana. They reappear in history in the narratives of Joutel in 1687 and Casañas in 1691, and it is conjectured that they were then living on Shawnee Creek in the southern edge of Rusk County, Texas. A Spanish mission called San Jose de los Nazones was established July 10, 1716, for this tribe and the Nazoni jointly, east of Angelina River and about 20 miles northwest of Nacogdoches. It had small success and was abandoned in 1719 on account of a threatened French invasion. The same year, a settlement of that tribe was visited by La Harpe. August 13th, 1721, the mission was reestablished and the chief of the Nazoni reinstated as governor, in parentheses. In 1729 to 1730, it was discontinued here, withdrawn ultimately to the neighborhood of San Antonio, and rechristened San Juan Capistrano. But few, if any, Hasinai went with it. The tribe continued to decline in numbers during the 18th century. Why did they decline, huh? Slavery, paper genocide, relocations, wars, murder. Right? So they declining. As late as 1812, they're saying a village of 200 souls, including 40 warriors, was reported to the Sabine River, on the Sabine River, sorry. Their later fortunes followed those of the other Padu tribes. Anadarko population, according to what they're saying here, says in 1805, Sibley reported 40 men in this tribe. In 1812, we have 200 given as just noted. And in 1818, 20, we have 30 given and a population of 120 to 130. In 1820, Padilla states that they numbered 200, and in 1828, Sanchez enumerated 29 families. In 1851, they were reported to number 202. In 1855, 205. In 1857, 210. After which date they are not given separate status. They are forgotten after that. And that's it for the Anadarko, which was a Kadu tribe, right? Of the Hasinai Confederacy, right? Look at that word, guys. Sinai. Look at that word. It says Sinai, right? Sinai, Mount Sinai, Hasinai, Hasinai. Yeah. So we continue with the Apalachee, right? One of the more known or popular, larger tribes of the Southeast, right? The Apalachee. The tribe or tribal confederation living between Auxilia and the Apalachicola rivers, Florida. They were first encountered by the Spaniards under Narvaez in 1528, and we got those accounts and in past videos of that expedition. And to their persistent attacks, the misfortunes of that expedition are mainly to be attributed. The Apalachee wasn't having it, right? They're like, we read this. We read how the Apalachee, messing with this Narvaez expedition, as it says here. The persistent attacks and misfortunes. De Soto's army reached the Apalachee province October 1st, 1539, which again, we have read De Soto's travels in the southeast, crossed a swamp or river, evidently the Auxilia or Auxila, and came to a town called Ivitachuco or Huitachuco, which was in flames. October 5th, they came to another called Kalahuchi, where they found a great quantity of dried venison. And finally, they reached Iñahiko or Iviahika, Iñahika, represented as the most important town of the province. They remained there until March 3rd, 1540, suffering constant attacks from the Indians, who preserved the character they had acquired in their dealings with Narva S. One relation represents the next province they traversed, one called Apalachee, beyond Flint River, as subject to Apalachee. If not related to the Apalachee, the Capecheki, again, Capacheki Indians, were probably connected with the Hichiti, whom they found just beyond. In 1564 to 65, the French at Fort Caroline, got a lot of videos on Fort Caroline, right? On St. John's River, heard that it was from this province that the gold was to be obtained. We also get quite a description of it, albeit secondhand from Fontaneda, from information gleaned while he was held captive by the Calusa between 1551 and 1566. And incidentally, we may add that he effectually disposes of the story of Apalachee gold. The Apalachee are said to have asked for missionaries as early as 1607, and Father Prieto, Father Prieto, huh? You guys know what Prieto means in Spanish? Prieto literally means so-called black or dark-skinned person, aprieto. You know, they in a lot of Spanish countries, especially in the Caribbean, they use that word for black, prieto. And even in Portuguese, right? The Cape Verdeans I grew up with in Boston, they use that, prieto, prieto, so-called black. So Father Prieto, huh? Father so-called black, huh? Visited them the following year, being received with great enthusiasm. The need of missionaries is repeated frequently in documents dating from 1608 to 1633, but active work was not begun until the year last mentioned, when on October 16th, two monks set out for that tribe, and the conversion proceeded rapidly. Conversion to Christianity. Barcia says that it was interrupted by a native outbreak in 1638, but this notice probably belongs to the year 1647, when a great revolt did take place, in which 3 of the 8 missionaries were killed and 7 churches and covenants already established were destroyed, together with the sacred objects, all right? The idols, the sacred objects. You mean the idols, huh? The lieutenant of the province and his family were also slain, and the first force sent against the Indians under Don Martin de Cuera was compelled to retire after an all-day battle. Not long afterward, however, the uprising was put down with comparative ease, seemingly by means of friendly Apalachee. 12 of the leaders were executed and 26 others condemned to labor on the fortifications of St. Augustine, the tribe as a whole being compelled to furnish workers annually for that purpose. The conversion of the tribe was now completed rapidly, huh? The Apalachees converted, huh? Apalachee were involved in the Timucua Rebellion of 1656, but the disturbance seems to have subsided among them without application of force, though a captain and 12 soldiers were placed in San Luis, one of the head towns, throughout the rest of the century, and indeed until 1701, the Apalachee made constant appeals for relief from the labor imposed upon them at the end of their rebellion. But this was not finally accomplished until 1704. In the winter of 1703 to 1704, the tribe was entirely disrupted by a South Carolina force under Colonel James Moore, consisting of 50 men with 1,000 Creek allies, huh? So-called Creek, what? Who's helping Mr. Moore? Other Indians enslaved who or disrupt the Apalachee, right? Yeah, tribal warfare. They helped. Yeah, many of our indigenous ancestors helped out the European ancestors invade other Indians, yeah, enslave them, destroy them, disrupt them, as it says here. The Apalachee had suffered a severe defeat the year before, but at this time, Moore claims to have brought back 1,300 Apalachee with him, not counting 100 slaves. So basically, yeah, they're trying to downplay that what he did. What do you mean he brought back? He brought back as slaves. 1,300 Apalachee with him, not counting 100 slaves. They were the slaves, right? Those other 100, probably other Indians, probably European slaves, who knows? But listen, look, 1,300, just him alone, enslaved, taken back, Apalachee Indians. The former he established near New Windsor, below the present North Augusta, South Carolina. Look where he ended. Look where he brought him. He brought him to North Augusta, South Carolina. 1,300 Apalachee, huh? The number carried off is conceded by the governor of Florida to have been 600, while Bienville, writing from Mobile, says the English had killed and made prisoner 6,000 or 7,000. Had killed or enslaved, made prisoner. What do you mean? Just say enslaved. Just say made, turn into slaves. It's like they don't want to say it here, right, in this book. Because then you start asking, okay, wait, I thought it was only African slaves. What do you mean you're enslaving Indians? And we've already broken this down, right, in my part one of my playlist, the real slave trade. Go check it out if you haven't. How much American Indians were being enslaved and put in plantations and taken to other places. Yeah, this is real history, guys. So you see how, one guy says 1,300, the other one says no, it was 600, and another one says nah, it's actually 7,000. That's a big difference. Which one is it? That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. They try to downplay what they did and try to lessen the numbers, right? And then they add, oh no, but we brought Africans in, to replace them. No, stop lying. You reclassified a lot of these people. The English estimate is probably not far wrong, right? The English is not far wrong. What, 6,000 to 7,000 Apalachee enslaved? Those who escaped the English went to Pensacola, right? Pensacola, isn't that in Florida? Pensacola, those who escaped, we're talking about runaway slaves, right? Runaway escaped. Say it. Why don't you just say it? Runaway slaves ended up in Pensacola, right? So-called Seminole. What does Seminole mean again? Right? Runaway, run fast like an arrow, cimarron. All right. Runaways, huh? And most of them moved later to Mobile, probably toward the end of 1705, thinking that the French would furnish better protection. At the outbreak of the Yamasee War, the Apalachee, who had been taken to the savannah, retired among the lower creeks, where some had already settled. And when the English faction there acquired the ascendancy, they withdraw farther south, part into the old country, part to a new settlement near San Marcos on the Gulf Coast, and part to the neighborhood of Pensacola. All right. Now, picture all this. If you guys know that you had ancestors in all these places we're mentioning, think about it. You might have this Indian heritage, this type of Indian in you, not just what you think Seminole or Five Civilized Tribes or Cherokee or Blackfoot. Everybody has the same Indian ancestors, not understanding that a lot of times it was generalized, right? And not understanding that they're leaving out all these other tribes that are possibly mixed with the ones you're talking about or you think are. In 1727, the Apalachee belonging to these last two groups are said to have revolted, all right, in parentheses, against Spain, but by the next year had returned to their allegiance. Later, all seem to have gravitated to Pensacola, for we hear no more of the rest. But the Mobile and Pensacola bands maintained a separate existence as late as 1758, and probably until 1763, when the territories of both were ceded to Great Britain. In consequence of this political change, the Apalachee appeared to have united, and by about 1764, they, together with the Haensa Indians, and the Pakana. Pakana, huh? Shout out to my boy Rob, Pakana, huh? Band of the Creeks, the Pakana, settled on the Red River. Their land and that of the Haensa, a joint lying between Bayou de Arro and Bayou Jean de Jean. In 1803, the Taensa sold this land to Miller and Fulton, but only a portion was allowed the purchasers by the United States commissioners in 1812 on the ground that the sale had not been agreed to by the Apalachee. The Apalachee probably lost their share before long. However, in one of those ways in which things were in the habit of taking place in bargains between so called whites or Europeans and Indians. But the survivors remained in the region and died out or united with other tribes. A few families went to Oklahoma with the Creeks, and mention is made by Dr. Gottsched of 3 families of them on the North Canadian River. The following name of women being given Simahi, Huthayi, and Santi. Santi. And it says here Apalachee population. The early population of this tribe has often been exaggerated. Or really has it? The most reasonable is an estimate of 5,000 made in 1676. The most reasonable according to who? You guys have been lowering the numbers, and we know it. Because you don't want to admit how many Indians you enslaved and murdered. And, put through paper genocide. The most reasonable, he's saying 5,000, though it is possible that 100 years earlier there were 1,000 more. And Mooney suggests 7,000 in 1650, including a few other tribes. Well, Governor Salazar's mission, by mission estimate made in 1675, gives a total of 6,130. The figures given by Moore, 1,300 free Indians plus 100 slaves, and Bienville 400 Indians, indicate that there were about 2,000 of at that time when they were destroyed. 1704. The exceptionally careful Indian census taken by the English in 1715 gives 275 men and a total population of 638 in the 4 Apalachee villages under their control on Savannah River. The Apalachee town near Pensacola contained more than 100 in 1718. In 1725, the mobile band had been reduced to 100. But in 1728, there were still 2 villages in the old Apalachee country, numbering 140 and 20 persons, respectively. In 1726, 87 Apalachee were enumerated in the missions about St. Augustine, and 41 in 1728. In 1758, there were said to be 30 warriors in the western settlements, probably including practically all the survivors in both Spanish and French territories. In 1805, Sibley tells us there were only 14 warriors in the Apalachee tribe in Louisiana. Morse gives this band a total of 150 as of 1817. But this is probably too high. Probably. That means he doesn't know. Probably. But it's okay. We respect the work he did to sort this out, in more detail for us. So it says, see also Timucua. Okay, so we're going to read about them when we get to the T's, right? We're going in alphabetical order, right? All right, so we continue with another tribe here. It says here, the Apalachicola. This name seems to have been applied originally to a small group of tribes or towns speaking the Hichiti language and living on the lower course of the Chattahoochee. But the Spaniards used it in a loose way for the lower creeks, just as the French used the name of the Alabama for the upper creeks, all right? Generalized tags. That's what they're saying. However, in documents of 1675 and 1686, the word is applied to a single town, and later it is connected either with a town or a small group of towns. In 1690, 2 Franciscan monks were sent into the Apalachicola territory to begin missionary work, but the Acuera chief would not allow them to remain. In 1706 and 1707, Indians in alliance with the English, again, alliance with the so-called English, don't think white folks only, probably Creeks or Yuchi, attacked the Apalachicola and allied tribes which were then living on and near the Apalachicola River. Like I said, tribal warfare, right? Scattering some and carrying off others. So Indians enslaving others. I mean, we got a whole video on this, right? The narrative of these expeditions, preserved through the testimony of an Indian named Lamhati and rescued by the late David I. Bushnell Jr., gives the names of 4 towns or tribes which seem to have constituted the Apalachicola nation at that time. These were Efipik, all right, you ever heard of them? Got Auletli, another one, right? And then we got Soksoski and the Sunepa. These are from the Apalachicola nation. They were settled on Savannah River, below the Apalachee, at a place later known as the Palachocolas or Parachocolas Fort, nearly opposite Mount Pleasant. In 1716, as a consequence of the Yamasee War, they moved back to their old country in company with bands of Shawnee and Yuchi, but established their own town at the junction of the Chattahoochee and Flint rivers, at a place long afterward known as Apalachicola Fort. Their chief at that time was named Cherokee Leechee. Look at that, Cherokee Leechee. Is that the name of their chief? Look at that. Which means, or Cherokee Killer. A man who conducted many raids against the frontiers of South Carolina. Not many years later, a part moved north to join the Lower Creeks and settled on the west side of the Chattahoochee, just below a sharp turn, which it makes to the east. Cherokee Leechee and the remainder of the people joined them a little later, and even after that, the town was moved again, 1.5 miles higher up the river. According to Bartram, who gives us this information, the second removal would have taken place about 1757. He also tells us that fragments of the tribe moved east and south, some of them adding their strength to the nascent Seminole. According to one tradition, the Creek Confederation was initiated through a treaty peace between the Muskogee and the Apalachicola, and the importance of this town was indicated by the name Talwa, Laco, or Big Town, which they gave to it. It seems to have been the original white town of the Lower Creeks, as stated by Hawkins, until its place was taken by Casita. After the removal from the country, most Apalachicola settled near the present Okmulgee, Oklahoma. It says the Apalachicola population, the Apalachicola who were placed on Savannah River numbered 1715, just before the outbreak of the Yamasee War, 214, including 64 warriors and 2 villages. Later, censuses give the following numbers of warriors: 105 in 1738, and 2 villages of 60 and 45 respectively, more than 30 in 1750, 60 in 1760, 20 in 1761, 100 in 1792, including the Chiaja, and a total population of 239 in 1832 to 1833 in 2 settlements. And then it says, see Temuqua. All right, they're going to talk about it more when we get to the Temuqua. All right. And we continue. So here is on the Atakapa specifically, not just the Akokisa part of the Atakapa. So it says the Atakapa, right? And shout out to all the Atakapa brothers and sisters out there. By the French, this name was applied to all of the bands of the Atakapan linguistic family of Powell, except the Opelousas, Bidai, and 1 or 2 other tribes in Texas, of which they had no knowledge. But as the term Akokisa, used by the Spanish writers for those Atakapa on the lower Trinity River, and on Trinity and Galveston Bays has become current in Texas literature, I have considered the Texas Atakapa under that head. Besides the Opelousas, which will be considered separately, there were bands of Indians of this tribe on Vermilion Bayou, on Mermentau River, on the lakes near the mouth of the Calcasieu, and probably on the lower Sabine. Mention has been made of an exploring party sent westward by Bienville, which penetrated the country for 100 leagues and finally reached a tribe of cannibals. All right, again, that's the whole hijack, right, of the cannibals, and we proved it was wrong. These were undoubtedly some of the, or one of the Atakapa groups. As these Indians lay at some distance from the Mississippi and from the early European colonies, they did not suffer seriously from European intrusion until well along in the 18th century, though individuals frequented the French post along with other Indians. In 1760, Skunekmok or Skenetmok, short arrow, often called Kinemo, sold the land of which his village stood in a strip of territory 2 leagues wide between Bayou Tichy and Vermilion Bayou to a Frenchman named Fusilier de la Claire. And from this time on, the lands of the tribe were steadily alienated in spite of efforts to protect them. Notwithstanding the sale above mentioned, the Vermilion village was not abandoned until early in the 19th century, and in 1779 it supplied 60 men to Governor Galvez to assist him in his expedition against the British forts on the Mississippi. The Mermentu band furnished 120 men to Galvez in that expedition. In 1787, the principal Atakapa village was at the Island of Woods, later known as the Island of Lacassine, from an Indian reputed to be its chief. It was abandoned about 1799, and the Indians moved to a village on the Mermentu. This was the last village of the eastern Atakapa, and is said to have been occupied as late as 1836, but this is not certain. Some of these Indians united with the western Atakapa about Lake Charles. All right, remember, we got a whole video, well, not a whole video, but we have read about a book on the western Atakapa or the Lake Charles Atakapa and how they were described as very swarthy, dark skin with curly, wiry hair, like literally woolly hair, guys. And there's even a drawing of these people that we showed. And this is a so-called black Indian, right? That they're drawing, that they're showing us, right? Okay, so the Western Atakapa or Lake Charles Atakapa, right? But others scattered as far afield as Oklahoma. The last village of the Western Atakapa was on Indian Lake, later called Lake Prien, which must have been occupied until after the middle of the 19th century. In 1885, Dr. Gatschet learned of 2 women living near Lake Charles who had belonged to this town and collected a considerable vocabulary from them, which, along with a vocabulary of Eastern Atakapa obtained by Martin Duralde and a list of words from Akokisa, taken down by the French captain Beringer, has been published in Bulletin 108 of the Bureau of American Ethnology, all right, from 1932. A sketch of a number of Louisiana Indians belonging to several tribes made by A. de Batz at New Orleans in 1735 includes an Atakapa in the ancient dress. A few of the survivors of the old town were living in 1907 and in 1908 when the river visited that part of the state, but all are now dead. Ha! Dodge the hijack, you see? All are now dead. You ain't dead. You ain't extinct, you still here. Wow. Now it says here, Atakapa population. For the Atakapa alone, the figures gives above for enlistment in Galvez forces by the Eastern Atakapa, example 60 was 120, and the figure for all Louisiana Atakapa furnished by Sibley in 1805, that is 50, are all we have. My own original estimate of the population of this linguistic group exclusive of the Opelousas, was 3,500, which I am now inclined to regard as too high, in spite of the immense extent of country covered by them. And I even question whether the same is not true of Mooney's more modest estimate, about 1,000 less. All right. So again, they don't know. A lot of these Indians being reclassified, enslaved, murdered. I'm going to keep telling you this. They just, downplaying the numbers all the time. Okay. And we're going to continue, right? It says here the Atasi. Not much on the Atasi, but let's see what it says. It says the Atasi, the name of an old Muskogee town historically associated with the Tukabachi and Keleji, and with a history paralleling the latter, 70 to 80 warriors in 1740 to the 1800, 358 souls in 1832. All right. So they're associated, this Atasi people, with the Tukabachi and the Kialeji. All right. And that's all they have on this people, Atasi. Right. Now it says here, Avoyel. That's another tribe, guys, the Avoyel. It says a small tribe near the present Marksville, Louisiana, and on the lower course of the Red River below the rapids. Their name, which probably signifies stone people, or rather flint people, indicates that they were active as makers of traders in arrow points, or at least traders in the raw material. In 1699, Iberville was given to the Mobilian name of this tribe, Pasanak Okla, as the name of Red River, and the next year he met some of the Indians themselves. They are again noted by St. Denis in 1714 and La Harpe in 1719, and Duprat tells us that they acted as middlemen in providing a market for horses and cattle plundered by the western tribes from the Spaniards. Their name appears in 1764 in conjunction with those of the Ofo, Tunica, and Choctaw as participants in an attack upon a British regiment ascending Red River. And in 1767, they were still said to have had a village near the rapids of Red River. In 1805, Sibley learned of but 2 or 3 women belonging to this tribe who made their homes in French families, so-called French, right? Black French, on the Wachita. Wow. On the Wachita River, right? So what did they become? The Wachita Moors. Check out my Wachita Moors video. All right. It was French families, 30 French families that were settled in the Wachita Valley. And like I said in that video, most likely, what did they start doing? Mixing with the local Indians. And this is a great example of that. I wasn't making that up. Of course, that's going to happen, right? So now years go by and you forget all about your so-called French part. Now you're just Indian, right? Check out my Wichita Moors videos, guys, please, if you're having a hard time understanding what I'm saying right now. All right, so 3 women belonging to this tribe, they made their homes with French families on the Wichita. Some, however, settled with the Tunica, south of Marksville. And it was not until 1932 that the last individual known to have Avoyel blood passed away, dodged a hijack. See what I'm saying? The last Indian died. The last Avoyel blood passed away. Yeah, right. You got reclassified. You got enslaved. You got turned into a so-called colored person, so-called black, so-called African American. Continuing, it says Avoyel population. In 1700, Iberville met 40 warriors belonging to this nation, and Bienville considered that was their full strength. In 1805, as we have seen, there were 2 or 3 on the Wachita, and probably there were as many more with the Tunica near Marksville. So there was probably more than 2 or 3, right, in this Wachita River Valley region, remember? Okay, so I think we're going to end it right here, guys, because we're all done with the 8 letters. It's already been a little bit more than an hour. So we don't want to make these videos too long so people can actually sit down and read and sit through them, right? And we're gonna make many parts of this, right, until we're done. We're gonna go through all the list of names and tribes that you never heard of, all right, and so you can understand who they might be related to, what region of the Southeast they were in, and maybe that might help you connect you to your tribe specifically. So you're not just saying, I'm Cherokee and Blackfoot, like everybody, right? And I'm not saying that to make you feel bad or make you feel like you're wrong or you don't know. It's just that's what was uh, told to many people without the context, right? There's a lot of context missing in history and research and genealogy, all right, to understand. So we're going to end it right here for part one, all right? Again, this was the book, The Indians of the Southeastern United States by John R. Swanton, Classics of Smithsonian Anthropology, all right? I appreciate you guys taking the time to stick around all the way to the end and hear me read this. Hope you guys enjoyed the information and you see how there's so many tribes we don't even know or who they're related to or what region they were in. So I hope this helps you a lot. Okay. Very good info. We're going to continue. Don't worry. We're going to make sure to get all the tribes listed here. Okay. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Bye.
Robert Dre, Bye.